Dr. Bernard, if you would just give a couple of words, and then I'd like to have a conversation with you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share my memories and experiences with Martin Luther King, Jr. I'm one of the people who can rarely say this, and that is I have never shed a tear over the loss of Martin Luther King because I don't feel that we have lost him. So when I think of the last moments I spent with Martin Luther King, I came to this motel a few minutes ago and looked over and I saw that room over there, room 206. I'm the only one that has a key to room 206 because that was my room. In other words, my room was under Martin Luther King's room. You know why? Because I was not only living under Martin Luther King's rooms, I was standing under him.
My God.
In other words, I'm talking about understanding Martin Luther King. So I made it my business to understand what he was trying to do and how he was trying to do it. So I'll share with you my last words I had with Martin Luther King in this interview.
A lot of things going through my mind right now, especially knowing that on this day, 50 years ago, that you were right below Dr. King in room 206. But you had an important conversation with him about what he wanted you to do with the youth and where he wanted the youth to go from that day forward. Could you please share that last conversation?
Martin Luther King was not scheduled to be in Memphis when he was assassinated. He was scheduled to be in Washington, D.C. because he planned to have a press conference to announce the headquarters for the National Poor People's Campaign. And so he came to Memphis, but he was not expecting to stay. But when the riots broke out, he decided that he had to do the march over again because he could not be satisfied with the march of nonviolence breaking out with violence. So since he'd appointed me the national coordinator of the Poor People's Campaign, he said, okay, Lafayette, you go do the press conference in Washington, D.C., and I'll stay here and do the Memphis March. So I said, okay, because I did whatever Martin Luther King asked me to do. So the evening of in 1968, April 3rd, last night, I was with Martin Luther King in that room, 306. And we were working on the statement that I was going to make for Martin Luther King at the press conference at 14th and U in Washington, D.C. And he got this phone call, and he said he had to get up out of his bed, take off his pajamas, and come out in the pouring rain and go over to Mason Temple because they had made a phone call and told him he had to come. They were expecting him. In other words, it's kind of preacher's language, but he said, this is your crowd. They saw us coming in. Abernathy had called him on the phone, said they all got excited, but when they found out you were not there, their feathers fell. This is your crowd, Martin. That's what he said. So Martin Luther King jumped out of bed, put on his suit and tie, and went on out in the rain. And then he had a speech that he made. And one of his children said the other night, he hadn't even prepared for it. He didn't, I know. Because he didn't have anything. And he made that speech, the mountaintop speech. When he came back, we were supposed to finish the press conference, but he was so euphoric and excited and uplifted. All those people standing out in the rain outside listening to his speech. So we started the next morning. So here we were, the morning of April 4th. The last conversation I had with Martin Luther King was this. We finished the press statement, and Martin Luther King said to me this. He said, now, Lafayette, the next movement we're going to have is to internationalize and institutionalize nonviolence. Martin Luther King wanted to make sure that the young people understood that they were educated and trained how to organize and mobilize the movements, institutionalize, internationalize. Martin Luther King had gone international with his Poor People's Campaign. I need somebody to do some research for me. These are my last words here. I'm told that there were 17 countries that had poor people's marches as a result of that Poor People's Campaign. Poor people just gathered up their belongings and started walking to their capitals. I heard that, but I need somebody to do the research and find out which countries. So what happened is Martin Luther King had moved from a national to an international movement of poor people. And as a result of that, okay, we began to have concrete training all over the world. I don't have time to tell you. In Colombia, look up Bella Vista Prison. There are 60 countries that have Martin Luther King's Nonviolence Taught, called AVP, Alternatives to Violence Project. This thing is spread all over the world, but people don't even know about it. Martin Luther King will continue to live. Now, he told me, finally, that he was going to meet me in Washington, D.C., for me to go ahead. And Martin Luther King was a man of his word. He was shot down. But guess what? I looked up a few years ago, and that was Martin Luther King, 30 foot high on the mall. He kept his word. He said he was coming to Washington, D.C., and he showed up. And when Martin Luther King shows up, everybody shows up. I think Martin Luther King is here with us now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lafayette. Ladies and gentlemen, a living legend. Give it up for Dr. Bernard Lafayette. Finally, I understand from me that we're going to have a performance by Patrick Daly of the 105 Voices HBC